It is a real privilege to come along and share a bit of a perspective with you around what I'm doing and the journey I've been on as a civil engineer since I graduated many years ago now. I can say that. I can see one person that's probably from my era, at least in John, who's been working on the Sydney Metro project actually out in the northwest in recent times. Reflecting back to when I was in engineering, I'd have to say it's great to see a more balanced sort of room with more women. I think it was a very tough time from a female participation point of view, and it's a big agenda that we've certainly got in trying to encourage greater diversity within the team. So it's really good to see coming into a university lecture that there's a great participation of women. So I encourage you to keep at it and stick at it, because I think we had a huge dropout rate in the early years of engineering. I know when I was doing it. I am very humbled to come along. I have to confess that I didn't go to the University of Sydney, so I didn't know very much about Professor Roderick. So I did a little bit of study before I came along just to check out what the Distinguished Lecture was sort of born from. And certainly he was a very successful, driven individual. I can't compare myself too much to him. There was one element in the narrative that I read on the website that I think I can share in common with him, which is that he was apparently, despite being very driven, quite a shy person. And I can tell you that that is very much aligned with me as well. So coming out and doing sort of public speaking is not the thing that I jump out of bed to go and do. Particularly, I do a lot of public speaking because it's part of the job, and I know it's a really critical part of the job. But going out and doing it is not the thing that excites me a lot. Having said that, I've got a bunch of graduates that work in our team, and it's one of the things I enjoy more than anything in the job is to sit down and actually have a chat with graduates. So I'd love to hear some questions from you at the end of the discussion today. It's some feedback, so any questions you've got around sort of career development, where you might go when you leave university and so forth. It'd be good to have a bit of a conversation, so please be prepared for that. My aim tonight is to share some perspectives. I guess having been on a career journey for more than 20 years since leaving university, just give you some perspectives on some things that I've reflected on looking back to where I was at that particular point in time as I stepped out of university into the workforce. I've got a civil engineering background first and foremost, and that's where my pedigree is, although I did do a Masters of Finance in the journey there to diversify my thinking in that space. But I worked both in the government sector, where I have been for the last decade or so. I worked for a global engineering firm, Arup, for about 10 years as well. Got a really good breadth and range of experience. Had a bit of time in a little boutique project management company somewhere in the middle around of that as well. So had a good sort of breadth of experience along the way. All of it's been really good. Not every moment of it particularly enjoyable, but when I sort of reflect back on the journey, there's some things in there that I think have served me well when I have applied those. So I would like to share those with you at some point in time. Now, I reflected on when I left university where my head was at, and did I have this great plan, and have I delivered on that plan? I can't actually remember what the plan was, if I had it, to be fair to say. But I know that my head was very much along the lines of, should I specialise in something in engineering, pick a winner and really focus and develop a huge skill set in a particular area? Or should I go into a more general sort of area related to engineering in some way and develop my career and my skills through that? Or in fact, I was actually at a bit of a crossroads about whether I should do engineering or whether I should take the degree and jump ship and go and do something quite considerably different. Just not quite sure on my own feet at that particular point in time. I'd say to you, if you're in any of those headspaces, it's fine. If you're in that headspace where you want to specialise, go for it, because we absolutely need some really highly qualified specialists. If you want to generalise, go for it. We need some really good all-rounded people that have got a civil engineering background, because it's a fantastic degree, a fantastic foundation degree to have for a range of different things. If you choose to exit engineering, not a problem at all. I think in a way you'll use your skills and you'll actually apply them really well in other industries without doubt. I cross paths with a lot of civil engineers who haven't done a lot of civil engineering, but they're fantastic operators and highly successful because of that foundation they've got in engineering. So it's great to have those questions at the moment, and you know what, when you first leave university you can experiment with all of those. I guess that before I sort of give a bit of background to what I've done, there's three things that I want to leave with you tonight that I think have served me well when I have been successful, or at least helped to guide me in things that I've done. The first one is that whenever I've done something in an engineering sense, I would implore you to think about why you're doing it. Not just what you're doing or what you're building, but behind it, why is it that you're in doing that particular thing. It will serve you really well if you're in design, construction, anywhere in your decision making, if you really deeply understand why you're doing the thing that you're doing. And I'll unpack that a little bit more. The second sort of lesson that I've reflected on is that embrace the diversity of the workforce that you find yourself in. You're working here at the moment in amongst a lot of engineers, but when you get out into the workforce, you'll cross an enormous number of professions. Don't dismiss that, embrace it, and actually really learn from those professions, because it will make you a better professional and more rounded professional, and allow those professions to influence your thinking dramatically. They've all got a lot to offer, and certainly I think for me one of the things that's really helped me to be successful is to get a lot of different thinking, as well as some really good engineers around me. And the third one is seize every opportunity you possibly can. They pass you by sometimes, and a few of them I let go and think, man, I should have had a go at that. But every one of them, when I've taken a bit of a risk, sometimes I've failed big time, but it's always been worth it, and there's some great lessons out of that have served me really well. Engineering for me, I think, just to start where I was as a kid, I grew up in Botany, so not very far from here, down on the northern foreshores of Port Botany. When I was really young, there was no port, and there was only quite a small airport back in the 1970s, to give my age away a little bit. And I actually witnessed an absolute transformation in an engineering sense of that whole northern foreshore of Port Botany, with the construction of a port, the whole dredging of the bay, the delivery of a massive port in that area, and also the construction in the latter years of an additional runway for the airport. So my house that I lived in, it was on a little hill in Botany. It was the only hill in Botany. I could look over the bay and I could see everyday construction. So I think it was inevitable in some way, with a bit of a bent towards construction, that I would find myself years later involved in massive infrastructure in and around related to transport in some form, because it was very much front and centre for me. This is just a bit of an air photo of actually what's been happening in more recent times, but I lived somewhere in the middle of that screen and literally rode my bike down. Site security wasn't quite as good in those days. You could just get out on the weekend and go for a wander around the construction sites without too much trouble at all, and touch and feel the gear. I don't think you can do that quite as readily anymore. The other bit of my sort of personal history, which I'll draw on a little bit, is within my household. My grandfather, who I never met, unfortunately, because he died before I was born, had worked on the Harbour Bridge and on the southern arch of the Harbour Bridge, basically doing the riveting. And just to pick the photo, he's on your right with my grandmother. It's the only photo I've actually got of him, because photos weren't quite as popular as the days we've got before iPhones. They were pretty rare. So it was a bit of family pride to have been a part of that. My dad had every Harbour Bridge book you could think of, every sort of book that was about the construction of the bridge floated around our house, and I couldn't help but sort of be influenced by that and the contribution that had been made, and the pride that we felt as a family that we'd been part of that journey. Now on the left is the chief engineer, architect of that entire bridge program, Bradfield. So very much in front and centre in all of those books was an engineer that had a massive influence on Sydney. He's talked about it a lot, but it was, for me as a kid, it was just part of how Sydney had been brought together. So I think the combination of where I was living and what I was seeing there, and sort of some family background, those two things came together to almost make it inevitable from a pretty young age that I was going to do something in construction. I contemplated architecture, I have to confess. I contemplated architecture for a few minutes, but I moved pretty quickly into engineering when I thought a bit more deeply about it. And civil was probably my passion from the very beginning, because it was the big construction type things that really interested me. Notwithstanding, my dad was a mechanic, and I thought a little bit about mechanical engineering as well. And even when I got into engineering, I never went near electrical, I must admit, never went near it, because I think the marks were even higher for that at the time, even though there was some interest in it for me. So I think just sort of stepping forward to start to get into a bit of the theme about, the first thing I said is, when you step out into the workplace, I'd encourage you as much as possible to focus on the why you're doing something rather than just the what. So John, sitting in the middle of the audience here, is actually just come off a construction site on Metro, which I'll refer to in a little while, and he could describe to you in absolute degree, not just the what, but I know he can describe the why as well, and how important it is to Sydney. This bridge was a game changer for Sydney. without a doubt. It was a major construction feat in its time, really transformed the accessibility across Sydney without a doubt. There's plenty of photos, it's out for front and centre for everyone to see today. But I think the story when you get into it that's lost behind that is, you know, why the bridge, as opposed to what the bridge was in terms of an engineering feat, was much more about a transport system that Bradfield designed. And that's often lost in the history because everyone focuses on the iconic bridge. But front and centre for his plans were actually to develop a transit system for Sydney and a transport system for Sydney to underpin its growth. So anyone that worked on the bridge, why were they there? Not to create an iconic bridge. They were there to create the backbone of a future city. And that drove Bradfield. When you look at the history, it absolutely drove him. And the bridge was just essentially a spin-off of that in the way he went about it. He went through debates of tunnels and bridges and locating in one spot, locating in another. But he was absolutely determined and driven by the why, which is, I want to help Sydney grow in the long term. Now you can take that at the macro, but you can also take it at the micro. You might be designing a bridge in the future, and it might just be about the what. And I've got to put a bridge, it's got to span from A to B. But I would always encourage you to ask the why is this bridge going here? What's it about? What's its purpose? Because you'll think more laterally about the solutions that you can bring to the table if you understand the why. So don't ever get dumbed down into it's just about the what. Always be challenging. And if people aren't answering that question, you're probably in the wrong environment. I'd push hard to go to places where people are very interested in the why. Because you'll bring innovation, you'll bring smarts, you'll challenge, you'll improve, you'll make things absolutely better. In terms of the why for Sydney, wow, what an outcome. Not only a bridge, but a mass transit system, a railway system that serviced us for getting on to nearly 100 years now. And it's actually getting to a point where we stretch it as far as we can, but it is absolutely underpinned the growth of that CBD. If you go back 100 years, it looked absolutely nothing like that, and it couldn't look anything like that without someone like Bradfield saying, really understanding why he was doing what he was doing. So that's a lesson that I've reflected on. I've found myself sometimes spending a couple of years not realising that I haven't focused on that, but they've probably been the parts of my career I don't think I've done as well. But when I actually reset my head and think about why am I doing something, then that's when I really crack in and probably feel like I do much better as an engineer and as a leader. The second thing I said to reflect on is embracing diversity of skills and diversity of workforce. So I had a great opportunity working in Arup in the 1990s. I'm looking at this group thinking, what's the age demographic? And some of you wouldn't have even been at school at the time that the showgrounds were getting built back before the Olympics. So this was, I'm not sure when this particular photo was taken, but it was completed back in about 1998. I was pretty fresh out of university, got the opportunity to work on site on that job, get involved in the design and then work on that site. It used to be an abattoir. It was converted into the new showgrounds, which used to be out near the SCG, but they were relocated here in advance of the Olympics. And it was the centrepiece of getting the whole Olympics infrastructure up and going. We wanted it done 2 years before so it could be a test event and so forth. I went in thinking this is an engineering job and just get in and build. But what I found really quickly was the mass of people that were involved and the diversity of people that were involved in a showground environment. There was all of these user groups like the dogs, the cattle, the flowers, the cakes and all that sort of thing. There was a very diverse user group, all had very, very special needs. And we had to respond to all of that. And then we obviously had architects involved, but we also had a whole range. And the most critical thing in this entire job was pedestrian modelling and how people moved around. You can see the crowds in this particular event. So how people moved became the fundamental driver about how the whole site was laid out. The engineering, the technical engineering really became a secondary thing. And it took quite a while for the team to actually get their head around that. But it was probably my first real insight to realising that as an engineer, you're operating in quite a dynamic environment and you need to actually understand the hierarchy of where you sit in a decision-making process and respect that and challenge it sometimes, but that it will vary from project to project. And it's actually important to embrace it rather than resist it or push it away, because there's a tendency sometimes as an engineer, and I've done it myself, to go, well, I'm pretty clear on what I need to do, I'm just going to crack in and do that, and push pretty hard, and then you realise that you've actually not taken on board the broader set of thinking. So that was a very early career lesson for me. I'd encourage you to, notwithstanding you're a civil engineer and you'll work with a lot of civil engineers when you step out in the workplace, look for opportunities where there's a really good cross-section of different skills and disciplines. And I don't mean just mechanical and electrical, by the way. I mean, go really broad. I had a great opportunity to work on a bid proposal for Sydney-Canberra high-speed rail, which actually never got up. So a bit of an example of a failure in the end, but we spent nearly 2 years of technical engineering work designing up a concept to get from Sydney to Canberra, and we haven't been the only one to do it. There's been a few others that have had a go at that. So nearly 2 years of my engineering career was spent doing that. And we were really focused as an engineering group in laying all of that out. We had financiers involved, we had rolling stock providers on board. We all thought it was a great idea. And at the last minute, the lead of the consortium that had been put together, and we'd spent tens of millions of dollars on this, thought it would be a good idea to get an end operator that would run the trains involved to have a bit of a look at the business case we had and everything. And we actually brought someone out from the UK to have a look at that, and they had a look in Sydney and they had a look at the concept and went, this is a fantastic idea, it's really good. We're just going to go down to Canberra and have a look at the market down there, and then we'll come back and sign up to be part of your consortium. A couple of days later, we got a phone call from the airport, and they were on the plane heading home because they very quickly assessed that from the proposition that we had that there wasn't a business in it. They'd gone to Canberra. Canberra was not Sydney, and they thought Canberra was another Sydney, and they very quickly realised that in fact there wasn't a business. Now we'd spent 2 years working on that, only to have someone come in with a really fresh set of eyes and a diverse perspective and completely change the game on us overnight. So that was a massive lesson for me, is when you're going, go out and test and look for that diversity of skill, diversity of thinking, because otherwise you can find yourself going down some blind spots really, really quickly. So at the moment, look out to work with planners, look to work with financiers, look to work with lawyers, look to work with commercial people, quantity surveyors, communications specialists. We've got one right here in Chris Grimer who works with me on the team. I had a pretty early entree doing some work on the Pacific Highway, duplicating part of that, and we went out and did some community consultation. And that's a really hard thing to do, go and talk to people about wanting to acquire properties and decide on routes. And I went in behind a couple of communication specialists and was absolutely blown away by their capacity to engage with people, to draw out information, to be empathetic, and to deal with that whole situation. Whereas an engineer, you come in and think, yep, pretty clear what I'm going to do. So that, once again, was a real eye-opener to having a bit of diversity of thinking and skills in and around a particular issue. The third thing that I said to reflect on as a bit of a life lesson is to seize the opportunities. Now, you might wonder why I've got a little country photo up on the screen. When I started at UTS, I chose what was it called in those days, a sandwich course. I'm not even sure whether they offer it now, where you study for 6 months and then you got to go and work for 6 months, which I thought was pretty good because I needed a bit of cash on a fairly regular basis, so that was quite helpful for me. Maybe that was the real rationale why I went to UTS, because I don't think that was an offer at Sydney at the time. But we were actually in a really bad spot economics-wise at the time. There weren't many jobs going around. Knocked on many doors of construction companies and design firms to see if I could get a 6-month sort of crack in the workplace with only 6 months of uni under my belt. Couldn't get a job anywhere. Found a little job down at Yass Council, just outside of Canberra. I think population 4,000 people, 2,000 kilometres of road network to look after, a little sewage system that looked after the town and so forth. 2 engineers, and then they wanted someone to just come in and help them out a little bit. So desperate for cash, I went and did it, thinking, well, I don't really want to live in the country, but at least it's only 3 hours or 4 hours drive from Sydney, so I can come home on a weekend and that sort of thing. But I went in with a headspace of, this is just something I've got to do, but I came out of it completely blown away just with the opportunity that I was given, because there was only 2 other engineers. I got to do just about everything you could think of as an engineer, as I was fully qualified. Now, though I had 2 great mentors, and I always look back with huge fondness to go, that really set my career up in terms of thinking about public infrastructure, because I just got to see the full gamut of looking after a community. And that chief engineer knew his job was to keep the farms moving and to keep that community moving. He was really clear about that objective from the get-go, and that had an influence on my career. Now, if I turned my back on that because I wanted to stay in Sydney, would have missed out on that. So it's funny how little things pass you by, and I reflect and go, if I hadn't have done that, where would my career have ended up? I only spent 6 or 7 months down there, but it did shape the direction. I talked about that Sydney-Canberra high-speed rail job. There was a couple of options in that project to work on, and one of them was to lead up a bit of the design work, and the other one was to be a bit more administrative and help project manage the consortium along the way. And I wasn't quick enough, and I ended up with the administrative sort of job in that space. But what I found out was I got to sit at the table of the consortium that was making all the decisions about where they would invest their time and effort as a business rather than simply as a sort of an engineering design aspect. And out of all of that, my whole eyes opened up, and I shared you that experience about the whole thing falling over when the operator turned up. My eyes were opened up to the bigger picture of where engineering fitted in and the contribution that it had to make, but also that it was about a business. So I rolled on and did a Masters in Finance to help strengthen my skills around that without wanting to abandon my engineering sort of background and what I wanted to do. But if I hadn't have actually picked up on that little opportunity as well, then I would have missed out on that experience, and it would have actually probably undermined what I've been able to do since that time. So I've talked about a few life lessons, and I will come back and reflect on those. But probably something else that I thought about was that I was trying to put myself in your shoes and then think ahead 20 years about what your work experience would be like by the time you get to sort of my point in the career. And so I looked back to do that first, and I looked back a long way, given that I talked about Bradfield. This is actually a photo of the construction of the underground in Sydney. Now, anyone that's working, in fact, great to have a couple of light rail people here, because you know how hard it is to work in and around the Sydney CBD and out in the southeast at the moment. 100 years ago, as Dad said, it was a bit easier in terms of construction because you had a bit more space. There weren't quite as many community issues around. There weren't as many sensitivities. You tended to have a little bit more imprimatur just to get in and build along the way. That is Hyde Park, I think. So you can imagine trying to do that in Hyde Park today and what sort of reaction you may actually get in there. This is actually up at Wynyard, York Street. So imagine York's trying to do this to York Street and Wynyard Park today. So they pretty much shut the northern end of the CBD down, dug a hole. So this is even a bit more dramatic than what's going on in George Street with light rail at the moment. So there was a political licence and available sort of opportunity, I think, for Bradfield to go in and go hard to create this sort of thing, because the city wasn't as busy, let's face it. You know, public infrastructure, there was more of an imprimatur to get on and just make things happen and move. Be fair to say, if you look fast forward to now, and I'm in the middle of responsibility for removing a number of buildings in the CBD to put a station in, the shift in challenge has gone forward enormously. So we've got these really highly constrained sort of environments in which we're working. We've got to basically do what I call, instead of open heart surgery like Bradfield had the opportunity to do, we've still got to do keyhole surgery in and around. Now, Bradfield had a lot of labour, and he had a lot of available workforce and willing people to come and work. Interestingly for us now, we're really struggling for construction workforce. As society's become more professional, we're losing the opportunity to get people on the construction front as well. So one of our other big challenges, apart from greater community expectation and tighter space, is also, as engineers, thinking differently about how we build things, because you won't necessarily have the same workforce available to do things that Bradfield would have had a long time ago in terms of just general labour that we had. And that's something I think, if I look forward for you in 20 years' time, you're probably going to be more challenged by things like that. This will be nothing compared to what you're going to confront in terms of constraints. And as an engineer, you're going to have to get smarter and think differently around it. There's lots of new technology coming through. I'm amazed even of just little things like being able to use drones for inspections on things that we're starting to bring in, just as little subtle innovations in the work that we're doing. You think about 3D printing and new materials and so forth and what's coming in, there's massive opportunities to do more off-site manufacture before we take things onto site as civil engineers, and that will be an enormous sort of positive to safety, to innovation, to construction speed, to cost efficiency and those sorts of things. So while I'm saying to you, you've got a bigger challenge than I've confronted in the last 20 years, I think you're also going to have some awesome tools to work with if you're prepared to push and innovate over that time and make the most of it. So talk a little bit about what I'm actually working on here and now, Sydney Metro. As was said at the intro, I'm responsible for delivering a new 66 kilometre fully automated metro line from northwest Sydney through Macquarie Park, the lower North Shore, under the harbour, through the middle of the CBD, around Waterloo. There was actually a proposal for a station, I think within 100 metres or so of here early on in the scheme, but it ended up going over to Waterloo instead, and then moving out to Sydenham and out to Bankstown. So, yep, it's just another train. That would be one way of looking at it, but it is fundamentally different to what we've got here in Sydney. If you've travelled overseas, you've definitely travelled on an automated metro somewhere. If you've been to Singapore, Hong Kong, Paris, some parts of London, Network and so forth. It's not out there in terms of at a global scale, but it is very different for Sydney. So I've been working on this job since 2011. I should say that it wasn't an easy start in getting into this role. In fact, if I go back and reflect on opportunities and failures, I talked about my opportunities. I actually had a go at trying to build a metro line in the city back in 2006, 2007, 2008. I was actually a chief executive of an agency in government set up to do that. Pretty young at the time, so felt quite honoured to have that opportunity. But somewhere in the middle of all of that, policy changed and it was cancelled. So I'd seized that opportunity and then had it sort of fail right in front of me. Had to lay off a couple of hundred people, had big impacts on industry and so forth along the way. But I look back on that and go, that set me up so well to do the job that I've been able to do since 2011 because I learnt so much out of that failure. So we're in the middle of a major delivery. It is fair to say, I think, been a massive challenge, but also a massive honour to sort of lead the projects from its very conception in 2011 up to where we are now, and we're within a couple of years of bringing the first train into service. The first part will open between sort of Rouse Hill, Cudgegong Road and Chatswood in 2019, so inside the first half of 2019. And then we will extend that service under the lower North Shore through the city and out to Bankstown in 2024. In terms of where it's up to with construction, building a 4 kilometre viaduct that's getting very close to completion. It's got a cable stay bridge on a curve, on a grade, the only one that's been built like that for a railway in Australia to date. There's been so much engineering expertise just to go into that 200 metres of structure so that we can do a long span. We've got 4 kilometres viaduct, we've got about 16 kilometres of twin tunnel to support that northwest area as well. Well advanced in the civil engineering space. And that's been really critical to set us up to bring in and do the station fit outs, put the rail track down and get ready to bring the trains in. Just beyond Rouse Hill, we've levelled a major site and put in a new modern stabling facility to stable the trains. It'll be fully automated so trains can drive themselves in overnight, know where they're stabled, and then they'll be driven out in the morning, they'll drive themselves back out again. So quite a fundamental shift in the way you operate the system to what we've actually got today. We can run higher capacity, higher frequency. We'll have greater safety features like platform screen doors so you can't accidentally fall onto the track or lose a pram over the edge of the platform and those sorts of things. So some really big innovations that we're bringing in with that. The why of that is very much similar to the narrative around Bradfield in supporting the future growth of Sydney. It will be the backbone of a lot of growth in and around the Sydney metropolitan area. To make that a success, but the diversity of the team that I need is unbelievable. I have got a huge number of engineers working for me, lots of specialists from electrical, civil, mechanical, signalling engineering, a whole host of acoustic engineers and so forth. So there's a lot of technical work in it, but around that, a lot of planners, communications people like I referred to before, financiers, commercial people, contractual people, lawyers, and the team is absolutely critical to being able to shape, drive and deliver something and make it as best as it can possibly be. So just going back to that point that I made before about a sort of life lesson of embracing, that's one of the things I've tried very hard to carry into this particular project and this particular concept. So this is a little bit of a session we did as a team about 18 months ago. Unfortunately, it's probably, you can't quite see it, but we set it, we pulled the team apart. We made sure that no two engineers got to go next to each other, so we had to put engineers and comms people and financiers and lawyers together, and they each got set of tasks to sort of build a little bridge and see how they could work together to do that. And it was a fun event, but it was just a bit of a test of how you get people with different skills and diversity to come together and work together to create something extraordinary. And it was interesting to see who succeeded and who didn't. Not necessarily the best technical person was the one that was actually able to succeed. It was those that were able to get themselves together, work together to make a success of it. So just a little anecdote, I guess, but very critical, I think, for if you're going to work in public infrastructure delivery, major public infrastructure, you're going to be part of a pretty diverse team. So get your head into that, embrace it, and make the most of it. The last one is, I guess, seizing the opportunity. I've talked about seizing the opportunity from a career point of view, in terms of an opportunity passes you by, grab it, run with it. I think the other thing is when you're in a job and you've got a bit of capacity to do it, make the most of what you're doing and push the bounds as much as you possibly can. The easy thing for me and my team would be with the Metro is just to focus on building the train line and just leave it at that and deliver a great service. And that will be really good. We will absolutely deliver that. Lots of challenges along the way. I can't say every day has been a breeze. When you're doing major civil construction, there are a few hiccups along the way, and I've had my fair share of them, there's no doubt. You don't have to laugh too much there, John. There's no doubt that there's been plenty of those. But we will have a great Metro service in 2019. But if we don't push the bounds, make sure that it connects very well with the transport system, including light rail at Central, for example, then it will not be a successful Metro service. And if we don't really engage with the surrounding areas and make sure that the development and the places around the stations work really well as well, then we'll have missed the opportunity of what we're actually trying to create with this Metro service. So in building a diverse team, we've actually also built quite a diverse perspective on what success looks like. Fantastic train service, but look further than that. I think that's the future for major professions. They will need to be able to diversify, work really closely together to make sure that they make the most of the public investment in these major infrastructure projects. So that's a bit of an overview of some career perspective that I've got, and also a bit of insight to where I think your challenges are going to be as engineers as you leave and go into the workforce going forward. I guess those three themes just to reinforce around always focus on the why, about what you're doing. Embrace the diversity of the skill sets that are out there in the industry when you get in and start working on things, and make the most of every opportunity you've got. Don't be afraid to fail, I'd say. If you don't have one or two failures along the way, you won't have learnt within that space. You may feel like you've lost a year or two of your life, but in somewhere in there, that'll actually be a bit of a gem for you in your future jobs. So I'm really keen to get some questions going, a bit of feedback and discussion. So I'm happy to throw it open to the floor, and thanks very much.
Could I ask you, what do you think the big change for the past 20 years, like what kind of skills or opportunities you need to get for the civil engineers in the past and now? What's the big change like for you?
Okay. I have to confess that when I graduated, there wasn't even a concept of email. So there's some, the world has changed quite a bit, I have to say, over that time. I think it is around your capacity to work with others. So I guess it's coming back to that theme I talked around. The world's gotten a lot more complicated. You can't just, I guess, lock yourself in a little box and do your little bit. You've actually got to engage, listen, understand what people are looking for in a job that you're doing, really absorb that in, and then take all of that information and create solutions as an engineer. Has that always been there? It's probably always been there. I just think the demands and the expectations for that, and if you really want to get involved in some great projects as a sort of engineer, I think they're the sort of skills that are going to make the difference between you getting those opportunities and not getting those opportunities. So, just work on those. They may not come naturally. My natural operating style, to be quite frank, I said I'm shy. My perfect day in the world would be to go into the office, say hello to everyone on the way in, go and sit in the corner, sit in front of the computer, and just do my own thing. That would be awesome, absolutely awesome. I've come to realise, but that if you want to influence, if you want to drive great outcomes, you've got to get outside of your comfort zone, you've got to push yourself, you've got to go and do things like this. So I do leave the corner of the office occasionally and go and have a chat with people and engage. That's, I guess, an example where your natural style may be to do something, and it's okay to be like that, but you've got to push yourself to get out and engage with people and listen to them.
Thank you so much for the talk. The complexity of any of these projects is completely mind-boggling, and so this is referring to your point on how, you know, all the interactions that happen between the professions. But also I was thinking in terms of the city, you know, as academics we sit and do our models in the university, and it would be great to have some perspective on when such a thing is planned, what are the interactions that are considered, say, with the housing market or with land values or with, you know, 100 or so employment centers where you know, new attractors would emerge. So in the sense of how land use interacts with transport, how does that happen?
It's actually a really, really important question. And I think cities around the world have struggled with that, around where they put their investment in transport infrastructure and other public infrastructure and how it interacts with land use. And Sydney's had a bit of a checkered history around that. I think sometimes those investment decisions get quite politicised. There's been some pretty strong intent in the last sort of 5 to 10 years to get above that. I think we've got a Greater Sydney Commission that's out at the moment driving a bigger picture view about what we want the shape of Sydney to be like over the next 20, 30, 50 years. And that's, I think, providing the best framework I've seen for a long time about decision making on investment. But the sort of thing we're doing with Metro will absolutely shape the way Sydney grows. The northwest of Sydney will be so different to what it currently is. I mean, it is still a very growing area, but if we hadn't put Metro out there, it would have grown very differently and it would be much more car dependent. One of the things I'm really proud about is I know that a kid that's growing up in the northwest today, I don't know whether there's anyone from the northwest, but your chance to actually stay and live in that area is very limited, because for just about every dwelling out there is a 4-bedroom house with a 4-car garage. And as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old, if you want to leave home, there's not a lot of housing choice for you. You've got to go somewhere else in Sydney to live. You've got to move away from your family. With the Metro going in, you'll have the opportunity to live in a smaller apartment without a car, and you won't need a car because you'll have employment, retail, jobs and education all over the northwest of Sydney to travel on a mass transit. That's the sort of change that you can have. But we do need organisations like the Greater Sydney Commission to set that agenda and work within that, in answer to your question. So it's hard, it's iterative, it's very iterative. But it's not a case of them just saying this is how it's going to be and you go and work it out. I think they tend to say this is how we'd like it to be, and we'll go back and say, well, that's very hard to do in terms of where you might want to put a train line or a motorway or something like that. And then they'll take that feedback on and they'll revisit their plans, and it's quite an iterative thing. There's a lot of nuance to it. You do need a wide range of professions involved. It's, I think in the same way I'm saying to engineers, you need to embrace more diverse skills. Planners also have to do that as well. I think there's been a tendency for planners to go, we know what it is and this is how it'll be, and everyone else can just take it. They're under as much pressure as we are to bring the inputs of a lot of other skills and professions in.
Can I ask you, you've been very positive and you've painted a good picture of opportunities, and it's true, it's all there. But the flip side of that, what should we be worrying about? What keeps you up at night about infrastructure, about transport in Sydney, where we're going to be in 10, 20, 30 years, or if it's all good, just tell us that. But what I really want to know is what we need to watch out for, as we move through and embark on our careers.
Yeah, no, it's not all good. It's not all good. I think Sydney suffered from a lack of that planning that I was just asked about, I think, for 20 to 30 years or more, for some decades, and having a really integrated view. So we are playing a pretty significant amount of catch-up at the moment with the investment that's going on. I think everyone would have to acknowledge that there is a lot of investment going on in transport infrastructure. That's a real positive, but to me it feels like we are playing a catch-up to a generation that's been lost, and we've got to keep that momentum going. So there is a whole city shaping perspective here about what sort of Sydney we want, and that's a big public debate to be had about how much density we want around mass transit versus scattering. And I'm concerned in that if we end up with too much scattering, it'll really continue to sort of reinforce a fairly highly dependent sort of car use across Sydney, and Sydney can't afford to continue to be like that. We've got to create better choice, and I think metro, light rail, some of the other big investments are the foothold for that. But in the same way, 30 years ago, we had tiny pieces of a motorway network, which has now become a full orbital in Sydney. I'd like to think that we'll have a much stronger mass transit, light rail, metro network, upgraded Sydney Trains network over the next 20, 30 years. That's the opportunity that I think is there. If we don't seize that, then I think Sydney's going to be a tough place to live. I really do. I think people will get quite isolated. We'll get much greater disparity than we've already got in terms of living standards across the city as a result. I think there's a tendency for people to think that they've solved a problem. So this, I'm going to go within my own team, so I'm going to be a bit harsh on elements of my team sometimes. Yep, we've solved the problem, we know what we need to do, we're going to get on with it without being prepared to take in sort of feedback about what some of the issues might be on that and evolving it and adapting it. So I think traditionally big projects, the idea was let's define what it is, lock it, load it, deliver it. And on these big projects along the way, you realise that you maybe hadn't quite got something right and you need to be prepared to adapt. And within your own team, there can often be quite a resistance to that because they've taken quite a bit of ownership of what it is that they've designed right up front and not prepared to sort of concede or adapt around. So big picture, metro is really good. When you get into the detail of, say, a station location at Martin Place or Town Hall, my team thinks they've nailed the solution, but we've still got quite a bit of design work to do and interaction to do, and we're going to have to change that design quite a bit. So they're one of the challenges I find, is that people tend to want to jump to the solution too quickly and not be prepared to sort of continue to work it and finalise it.
What would be your dream public transport infrastructure project for Sydney? One that, there's a few on the drawing board at the moment, but one that might be done in like 30 or 40 years down the track, or something that's sorely needed that is just impossible, but would be amazing if it existed.
If you had stopped at the first part of your question, I would have said I am already working on the dream project. Because quite frankly, I feel like it is a huge privilege to be on it. I'd have to say that if I stick to a mass transit type of a sort of concept, because I think Sydney needs it, we need to see the development of more of a grid across Sydney. So at the moment, everything's quite CBD centric at a mass transit level. Everything tends to focus in around the Sydney CBD. What I'd love to see in the future is something that starts to crisscross Sydney more. Because our motorway networks do it and our road network does it, but we don't have great mass transit doing that. So whether it's something from sort of southern Sydney around Hurstville through Bankstown, Parramatta and Macquarie Park, or through Olympic Park, Macquarie Park, but more north-south, it'd be great to see something like that happen, because I think that would really change the ability for people to move around Sydney, because they suddenly can start making travel choices and interchange at various locations. So it'd be pretty cool to work on something like that. I have to say 30, 40 years out from here, I'm not sure that I'm going to be the one that's going to be doing that. I think it's people in this room that are going to be doing that, so I wish you well with it.